Imagine waking up, not to an alarm, to a low, constant hum, distant traffic, a refrigerator motor, a neighbor's shower through the wall. Before you even open your eyes, your ears are already working. You reach for your phone, scroll, and a podcast begins to spill into the room. It feels normal, even comforting. Silence would feel stranger than sound. You shower with that podcast still playing, water roaring over your head while voices compete for your attention. Then music in the kitchen while you make breakfast. Headphones in as you brush your teeth. From the moment you wake up, your brain is bathing in uninterrupted sound. Think of it this way. Your day has a soundtrack, and it never hits pause. On the commute, the volume shifts but never disappears. Car engines, horns, train brakes, announcements, more music in your ears. At work, the noise just changes costume. Open office chatter, keyboards, HVS, notifications, the faint buzz of someone else's meeting. It doesn't feel extreme. It feels like modern life, busy, productive. You tell yourself you're used to IT, but your brain is not casually observing this background. It is actively filtering it, moment by moment. Your auditory system has to decide what matters and what can be ignored. It's like running an invisible, nonstop spam filter and for sound. The thalamus, your brain's sensory relay station, keeps passing along what might be important. The reticular activating system stays slightly vigilant, just in case your name. A siren, or a sudden change appears in the noise. After work, you unwind with a show playing while you cook, maybe another video while you eat. Later, you scroll in bed with clips auto-playing. Then, finally, you turn to sleep with a fan, a noise machine, or the TV murmuring in the background. This is the phase when you tell yourself, I can't sleep without some sound. In fact, your auditory pathways never fully power down, even in deep sleep. Your brain keeps listening. Think of it this way. Asking your brain to rest in constant background noise is like asking your eyes to sleep with the lights on, not blindingly bright, just dim, tolerable, but always there. Low-level noise at 45 to 55 decibels, typical traffic or office levels, can nudge up cortisol, can keep your stress system slightly engaged, not enough to feel like panic, enough to quietly drain. Now stretch this out, not for a single busy day, but for 14 straight days without real waking silence. What happens when your stress hormones, attention circuits, and emotional centers live in that continuous sensory haze? Does your focus adapt or erode? Does your mood flatten or become more reactive? This marks a turning point for your brain's balance between vigilance and recovery. In this video, you're going to walk through that process as a chronological story of your brain in a noisy world, from the first 24 hours of constant sound to the subtle cognitive shifts around day 7, to the deeper risks, and importantly, how to run a noise detox so your brain can reset. Meanwhile, as you listen right now, your own auditory system is already doing the work this video is about. So what exactly are you bathing your brain in for those 14 days? It's not rock concerts or ambulance sirens. It's the soft, forgettable layer of sound you live in most of the time. Imagine sitting at your desk. There's a low HVAC hum, around 45 to 60 decibels. The distant whoosh of traffic, office chatter bleeding through a wall, maybe a podcast or music playing quietly while you work. None of it feels dramatic. You can talk over it, you can sleep through it, but it never really stops. Think of it this way. If loud noise is a sudden storm, constant background noise is a slow, steady drizzle. It seems harmless precisely because your brain can tune it out. In fact, that tuning out is the entire problem. To ignore it, your brain has to keep monitoring it. Second after second, day after day. From an evolutionary perspective, this is an artificial experiment you're running on yourself. For almost all of human history, silence was common. Continuous noise was rare. Nights were quiet. Days were punctuated by sound, not saturated with it. Now you accidentally enroll your brain in a 14-day trial where true silence is almost removed from your environment. This is the phase when your core sensory systems are pushed into an abnormal workload. Your thalamus, the relay hub deep in your brain, acts like the security gate. Every sound passes through it as it decides. Let this through. Block that. Your auditory cortex, stretched along the side of your brain, is the analyst, decoding pitch, rhythm, meaning. Meanwhile, your reticular activating system in the brainstem is the arousal switch, constantly adjusting how awake, how vigilant, or how drowsy you feel in response to incoming noise. It's like running a security system in a building where the hallway lights never go off. The cameras stay on. The motion sensors keep pinging. The guards never get a true reset. Your brain has to decide, over and over, which sounds are safe background and which ones might signal threat. With constant noise, it starts rewriting its rules. At first, you barely notice. Maybe you feel a bit more drained at the end of the day, a little more easily startled, or oddly restless when the room finally goes quiet. Those are early signs that your internal noise rules are changing in the background. This marks a turning point for the rest of the video. You're going to follow what happens as this experiment unfolds over time. The first 24 to 72 hours when your arousal systems strain to adapt. The 7-day mark when stress hormones, sleep architecture, and attention patterns begin to subtly shift. And the full 14 days when silence itself can start to feel uncomfortable, even threatening. By the end, you'll see how this low-grade sound bath can reshape mood, focus, even how safe your world feels, and what happens when you finally give your brain real quiet again. Hour 0 hits the moment you wake up into sound, not a blast, just that low constant layer. Traffic hum, fridge compressor, distant voices, maybe a podcast already playing. It feels normal. But from the first minutes, your brain is already negotiating with this invisible environment. Imagine your thalamus as the doorman to your consciousness. Every passing car, every air conditioner vibration, every notification ping knocks on that door in a quiet room. Each knock is distinct, in nonstop background noise. The knocks blur together into a crowd, and the doorman has to start working aggressively. This is the phase when your thalamus begins filtering harder, deciding which sounds are allowed through to awareness and which are pushed down into the basement of your perception. By mid-morning, you may notice only one thing: you feel on, a bit more wired. Your reticular activating system, the network that keeps you awake and alert, is being nudged by this constant input. It's like having a colleague gently tap your shoulder every few seconds. Not painful, just impossible to fully ignore. Research shows that even 45 to 55 decibels, typical office or traffic levels, can nudge up cortisol. Increase heart rate. Keep your body in a low-grade readiness mode. Think of it this way. Your body is running a tiny, unending fire drill. Your hormones aren't screaming, but cortisol is slightly elevated. Adrenaline trickles, and your heart beats with a little more urgency. Outwardly, you push through emails, conversations, commutes. Internally, your cells are spending extra energy to stay braced. By late afternoon, that can translate into subtle fatigue. You feel more drained after work than the schedule really explains. As the day wears on, your emotional filter starts to feel it. In traffic, the same honk that yesterday was just annoying now lands with sharper irritation. You might snap more quickly, feel less patient in a line, or struggle to focus on a single task without checking your phone. In fact, your auditory cortex is constantly updating what it considers background, forcing your attention networks to work harder just to maintain normal focus. Evening arrives, and you finally turn down some of the external volume. Maybe the TV goes off. The dishwasher finishes. The city quiets a little. You expect calm. Instead, you feel oddly restless, as if your brain is still leaning forward, waiting for the next sound. Meanwhile, your reticular activating system hasn't fully powered down. It has spent the entire day being trained to stay slightly more on. Then comes night one. You lie down, lights off, but the room isn't truly silent. There's the HVAC, distant cars, a neighbor's footsteps. Your brain's auditory pathways never completely switch off. Even in deep sleep, low-level noise can fragment slow-wave sleep and REM, causing micro-arousals, tiny spikes of alertness that don't wake you enough to notice. But shave away the depth of your rest. You wake up the next morning technically having slept, yet not fully restored. This marks a turning point. After just one day, your brain is still coping, still reacting. But if this constant background sound continues into day 2 and 3, your nervous system won't just adapt in the moment. It will begin to rewire its baseline. The real shift starts when noise stops being a visitor and becomes the default setting for your world. By day 2, something unsettling happens. The noise that kept you on edge yesterday starts to disappear. Not because it's gone, but because your brain is learning to pretend it isn't there. Imagine your auditory system as a gatekeeper that's getting overwhelmed. The thalamus, your main sensory relay, begins to downrank the constant hum, passing fewer of those signals up to conscious awareness. Meanwhile, your auditory cortex starts treating that steady sound like visual wallpaper on a screen, always present, rarely noticed. Neurons that fired intensely on day 1 now quiet down because the input is predictable. And, as far as your brain can tell, not immediately dangerous. This is the phase when that adaptation feels helpful. You can tune out the air conditioner, the traffic through the window, the office ventilation, but there is a price. The same filters that mute the background also blunt your sensitivity to small, meaningful changes layered on top of it. It's like lowering the volume on an entire track just to hide the static. A coworker's quiet question, a soft notification, the slight crack in a friend's voice when they're upset. Those signals now have to fight through the dampening your nervous system has applied to everything. Think of it this way. Your attention system is running triage. The reticular activating system, which helps decide what deserves your focus, is flooded with ongoing noise input to cope. It raises the threshold for what counts as important. By days 2 and 3, that higher threshold can slow how quickly you register words, names, instructions, especially in already noisy spaces. Studies on urban and school noise show that chronic low-level sound exposure is linked to slower working memory and poorer reading and concentration. You may notice you reread the same sentence, lose your train of thought mid-task, or feel mentally drained much earlier in the day. Your body doesn't take this lightly, even if you consciously get used to it. The constant sound keeps your stress system slightly activated. Cortisol and adrenaline don't spike like an emergency alarm. They hover like a low siren in the background. Over 48 hours. That can translate into shallow breathing, clenched muscles, a shorter fuse. A door slam that you would normally shrug off now feels like an attack. You might snap at minor interruptions, feel irrationally irritated by someone tapping a pen, or crave silence with an intensity that surprises you. In fact, this emotional spillover is one of the earliest warning signs that the noise is doing more than just filling space. Your brain is spending extra energy to filter, suppress, refocus. And that effort leaks into mood and patience. Yet at this stage, your deeper circuits still treat the situation as temporary. This marks a turning point. If the sound stops soon, your filters can relax and your baseline can reset. But if the background hum rolls on toward a full week, your brain will start to treat this constant stimulation as the new normal. And that is when the changes become more persistent and much harder to simply shake off. By night 3, the real damage is happening where you can't see it. You're lying in bed, eyes closed, maybe even convinced you sleep great with that fan, TV murmur, or distant traffic. But your brain is not off, it's on patrol. Imagine your bedroom as a dark house with one light left on in the hallway. That light is your auditory system. Even in deep sleep, your ears keep feeding data to the thalamus. And the thalamus keeps asking a single question, threat or no threat. This is the phase when your brain should be dialing down external input. Instead, with constant background noise, it keeps scanning, matching patterns, flagging anomalies, like a security guard who never gets to clock out. On paper, your sleep might look fine. 7 or 8 hours in bed. You don't remember waking up? But inside the night, the architecture is quietly rearranging. Environmental noise has been shown to reduce slow-wave sleep, the deep, heavy stage where your brain clears metabolic waste and your body repairs tissue. It's like someone shaving thin slices off the deepest layers and sprinkling them into lighter stages. You dip in, then pop back up. Micro-awakenings you never recall. A night that technically happened, but never fully restored you. Meanwhile, REM sleep becomes fragmented. This is the dream-heavy stage tied to emotional processing, learning, and memory consolidation, with persistent noise. REM episodes can be shorter and more interrupted, as your reticular activating system keeps pulling you closer to the surface. Think of it this way. Every unexpected siren, door slam, or TV volume spike is a tiny hand tugging you out of the dream, forcing your brain to restabilize its rhythm again and again. By the third morning, the bill comes due. You reach for caffeine earlier. 1 cup doesn't cut it. Brain fog creeps in. Reaction times slow. Small tasks feel heavier than they should. Motivation dips. Even though you slept, emotional control thins out. You snap at messages, feel weirdly fragile, or overreact to minor stress. In fact, degraded deep and REM sleep are directly tied to impaired prefrontal function and a more reactive amygdala, so your brain tilts toward threat. And away from calm problem solving, your heart and hormones notice too. Nighttime noise is linked to elevated blood pressure and higher nocturnal cortisol. This marks a turning point. The hours designed for rest and repair become hours of low-grade vigilance. Instead of sinking into parasympathetic recovery, your body hums along as if a distant alarm is always about to go off, nudging heart rate variability down and long-term cardiovascular risk up. Now pattern interrupt. Imagine 3 nights in a quiet rural cabin. No traffic, no devices humming, no TV glow. You fall asleep to actual silence. You wake up before your alarm with clearer thoughts, lighter mood, a body that feels strangely charged. It's like someone cleaned the windows in your mind. Snap back to your usual environment, where the hum feels normal. That contrast shows how adapted you've become to a level of noise your brain never fully accepts. And if 3 nights can shift your clarity this much, the next stage of constant sound will push your nervous system even further from its original baseline. Snap back into your usual weekday. The windows in your mind aren't clean anymore, they're fogging up. Imagine walking into an open-plan office at 9 a.m. and stepping into a low-volume storm, overlapping chatter, keyboard clicks, chvc rumble, coffee machines, Slack pings, footsteps, phones vibrating. Then a noisy commute home, followed by TV in the background and podcasts while you scroll. The volume isn't high, but it never really stops. This is the phase when your brain's attention system starts paying a hidden tax. Every time a new voice rises behind you, or a notification chirps, your prefrontal cortex has to do a tiny maneuver, orient to the sound, decide it's irrelevant. Then drag your focus back to the document in front of you. One interruption feels harmless. Hundreds across an 8 to 10 hour day? That's like trying to read a book while someone taps your shoulder every 30 seconds. Think of it this way. Your attention is not a spotlight you control perfectly. It's more like a tug of war between your task and your environment. The auditory cortex flags potential threats. The thalamus routes those signals. And the prefrontal cortex keeps saying, no, not that, this. Over the first few days, your body can keep up. By day 4, the constant reorienting drains mental energy. So deep work that once felt challenging now feels strangely heavy, as if your thoughts are wading through wet concrete. Meanwhile, your working memory is taking hits it can't quite articulate. You try to hold a complex idea in mind, a strategy, a bit of code, a nuanced email, while 3 conversations leak through your headphones. It's like balancing a stack of plates while someone keeps nudging your elbow. Research on children living near airports and busy roads shows slower working memory and reduced academic performance, even when the noise isn't loud enough to feel dramatic. There is no magic shield that appears when you become an adult in an office. By day 5 or 6, that cognitive strain starts to feel emotional. Low-grade stress hormones simmer in the background as your nervous system stays slightly on alert. You might notice end-of-day burnout that feels disproportionate to what you actually did. Decision fatigue over simple choices. A shrinking sense of mental bandwidth. In fact, you may catch yourself rereading the same sentence 3 times, or forgetting why you opened a tab, and quietly blaming your willpower instead of the soundscape that's been hammering your circuits. This marks a turning point. After almost a week, your brain isn't just tired. It's starting to adapt. Neural networks that prioritize rapid, shallow shifts of attention get reinforced, while the pathways for sustained focus go underused. By the time you finally step into a truly quiet room, the silence can feel unnerving, even loud in its own way. What happens next? As your brain begins to treat silence as a problem to solve, is where the real rewiring kicks in. Silence feels wrong now. After a week of constant background noise, your brain treats quiet like a missing signal, not a relief. This is the phase when your stress system quietly shifts its baseline. Imagine your stress hormones as a daily tide. Cortisol should rise in the morning to wake you up, then slowly fall so your body can unwind at night. With 7 days of low-level noise, traffic, vents, chatter, the hum of appliances, that tide never fully recedes. Each tiny sound spike is a nudge to your adrenal glands, asking for just a bit more cortisol, a whisper of adrenaline, not a full alarm, but a repeated tap on the shoulder hour after hour. Think of it this way. Instead of sharp stress peaks and clear valleys, your cortisol curve flattens. Mornings feel heavier, like you are pushing through fog because your nighttime levels never dropped properly. Evenings feel strangely wired. Your body tired, but your brain still on patrol. In fact, studies on environmental noise in the 45 to 55 decibel range show slightly elevated cortisol and blood pressure. Even when people say they have gotten used to it, your body has not. Meanwhile, your heart is keeping score. Heart rate variability, or HRV, is the tiny variation in time between each heartbeat. High HRV means your nervous system can flexibly switch between stress mode and rest mode. Low HRV means it is stuck in one gear. Constant background noise is associated with lower HRV, especially at night, which tells you that your sympathetic fight or flight branch is quietly dominating. It is like your heart is always leaning forward, ready to sprint, even when you are just sitting on the couch, subjectively. This feels like being permanently, almost stressed. You can sit down, but you cannot truly settle. You scroll, you half-watch a show, you lie in bed, and your mind keeps rehearsing conversations or replaying the day. Small annoyances, an email, a delay, a misplaced object feel bigger than they should. This marks a turning point. Your brain is no longer just reacting to noise. It is living as if noise is the default condition of the world. Now layer this on top of poor sleep and cognitive fatigue from the earlier days. Noise fragments your deep sleep. Your attention circuits are already overtaxed and your cortisol rhythm is blunted. The result is a loop. You are more tired, so you are more reactive to noise. More reactive. So the same sound triggers more stress hormones. More stress hormones. So sleep becomes even more fragile. It is a self-reinforcing stress spiral. If it is surprising that something as ordinary as background sound can reshape your stress system in just a week, this is only halfway through the 14-day journey. Subscribe to follow what happens next. And more importantly, how to undo this hormonal and nervous system drift. Because the real question is what happens when this state stops being temporary, when your brain starts rebuilding its circuits around the assumption that the world is never quiet. The changes do not stay in your hormones. They begin to etch into your long-term mood, focus, and emotional resilience. By days 8 to 10, that hormonal and nervous system drift starts to feel different from the inside. Imagine walking into a truly quiet space, a library, an empty office early in the morning, or your kitchen before anyone else wakes up. The sound is gone. But instead of sinking into calm, your chest feels tight, your fingers reach for your phone, and your brain starts hunting for something, anything, to fill the silence. This is the phase when silence itself feels wrong. Your body has spent more than a week bathing in a low, constant wash of sound, air conditioners, traffic, podcasts, background videos, each one a tiny drip of stimulation. Your brain has adapted. Its normal is no longer a mix of sound and quiet. It is continuous input. So when the noise suddenly drops out, your nervous system doesn't read that as peaceful. It reads it as a deviation. Think of it this way. Your sensory filters, the thalamus, the auditory cortex, the reticular activating system, have been recalibrating all week. To stop you from feeling overwhelmed, they've dialed down responsiveness to that steady hum. Baseline has shifted upward. Now true quiet is like walking out of a brightly lit room into darkness. For a moment, your perception doesn't trust it. The unfamiliar absence can feel unsettling, even faintly threatening. Meanwhile, another system has been learning to love the noise. Constant sound rarely travels alone. It comes packaged with music, conversation, videos, endless microbursts of novelty. That means tiny pulses of dopamine, your brain's reward signal, paired over and over with being surrounded by sound. Remove the noise, and you are not just losing decibels. You are cutting off a steady trickle of reward. This is why a quiet waiting room can suddenly feel intolerable. Your brain is not bored in a neutral way. It is in withdrawal from stimulation. It's like your reward circuits keep leaning forward for the next hit of engagement and finding nothing there. Restlessness, scrolling, opening apps you don't even care about. That is your dopamine system trying to rebuild the background soundtrack. Over these days, early emotional regulation changes begin to surface. Chronic environmental noise, even at 45 to 55 decibels, is linked to higher baseline cortisol, more fragmented sleep, increased risks of anxiety and depression, a brain that never fully powers down, that cannot relax into quiet without a spike of unease, has a harder time resetting stress circuits. Mood becomes less about what is happening and more about how overloaded your nervous system already is. This marks a turning point. If silence already feels uncomfortable by day 10, your brain is signaling that noise is no longer just an external condition. It is becoming an internal expectation. And once that happens, in the final stretch to day 14 is where deeper shifts start to emerge. Attention networks tiring, working memory straining, and even the way your brain processes the meaning and emotional tone of sound itself beginning to change beneath your awareness. By day 11, your brain is no longer just reacting to noise. It is organizing itself around it. Imagine trying to read a single line of text while a news ticker scrolls under your eyes endlessly. That is what attention feels like now. You can still focus, but only in short, brittle bursts before your mind flicks to the next notification, the next sound, the next, what else is happening? This is the phase when your attention profile looks different from 2 weeks ago. You sit down to write an email. Halfway through, your hand moves to your phone without conscious decision. You open a document. Within seconds, you are wondering if you should check messages, headlines, or background music. It is like your brain has learned that single-task focus is unsafe, because something important might be hiding in the noise stream. Underneath that restless scanning, attention networks are paying a price. Regions that help you filter input, the thalamus, parts of your frontal cortex, the reticular activating system, are working overtime. Think of it this way. Every hum of traffic, every distant conversation, every ping has to be tagged as ignore or respond. At first, your brain handles this efficiently. After 14 days, the filter is fatigued. Concentration starts to feel like pushing through static, as if a low-level hiss is laid over every thought. That extra effort drains working memory. Holding a phone number in mind, tracking steps in a project, or following a complex argument all rely on keeping information active while blocking interference. Constant sound turns that into a high-cost operation. You may notice more, "Wait, what was I doing?" moments, more rereading the same sentence, more losing the thread in conversations. In fact, research on children near airports and busy roads shows slower working memory performance under chronic noise, even when hearing is technically normal. Meanwhile, the noise is no longer just outside your skull. Your brain begins to mirror it. As external sound ramps up, internal chatter often follows, snatches of songs looping, imagined conversations, intrusive worries. This is attentional noise, mental activity that is not chosen, but barges in. It is like your brain has forgotten how to rest in silence, so it fills the gap with its own background commentary. The result is less mental stillness and more cognitive clutter. 2 weeks is enough to hint at deeper risks. Studies on long-term urban noise exposure suggest not only functional changes in attention and emotion, but possible structural differences in auditory pathways and limbic regions that process stress and fear. This marks a turning point. What begins as a functional adaptation to nonstop sound can, over years, become wired into the architecture of your brain. The unsettling part is that you may call this normal. The more your brain adapts to noise, the stranger true quiet can feel. And in the next section, you will see why, for a brain trained by constant sound, silence can feel less like relief and more like withdrawal. Silence feels strange now, for a reason. After 14 days of constant background noise, your emotional circuits are no longer just listening. They are bracing deep in your brain. The limbic system sits right next to the highways that carry sound. The amygdala, your built-in threat detector, is wired to the auditory pathways like an alarm to a motion sensor. Imagine a smoke detector installed directly over your speakers. Every unexpected sound, even at 45 to 55 decibels, can ping that system, nudging your body toward vigilance. This is the phase when noise stops being just sound and starts acting like a chronic micro-stressor. Research on urban noise, traffic, and even busy office environments shows a pattern: higher baseline anxiety, more irritability, greater risk of depression in people bathed in noise day after day. Your hormones quietly shift. Cortisol spends more time elevated. Your heart rate variability drops. And your mood becomes easier to tip over the edge. Think of it this way. Your amygdala is an overworked night guard in a building where the hallway lights never turn off. At first, it jumps only for real intruders. After 2 weeks of unpredictable hums, sirens, voices, it starts reacting to every shadow. It's like the guard begins to forget the difference between a genuine threat and the vending machine restocking. Harmless background sounds now arrive on a nervous system that is already tense. In fact, long-term studies link this kind of chronic activation to higher rates of diagnosed anxiety and depression. 2 weeks will not create a psychiatric disorder out of nowhere, but it can move a vulnerable brain closer to that threshold. Sleep becomes lighter. Emotional recovery overnight is weaker. Minor frustrations during the day feel strangely amplified. Meanwhile, your auditory circuits are adapting in their own way. When they are bombarded continuously, they turn the gain down to protect themselves. But here is the twist: when the noise finally stops. Some brains do not reset cleanly. Tinnitus can emerge as a maladaptive adaptation, a phantom ringing or hissing generated inside the system itself. Imagine a security alarm that kept blaring even after the intruder left. Because the wiring got stuck in on, pattern interrupt. Picture two parallel versions of you. One spends 2 weeks in a small urban apartment, traffic at 3 a.m., neighbors through thin walls, a fan, a TV always murmuring in the background. The other spends 2 weeks in a quiet rural cabin, distant wind, occasional birds, long stretches of true silence, same body, same brain, different soundscape. By day 14, the city version is a little more impatient, a little more drained, concentration slightly frayed. The cabin version feels slower at first, then steadier, with deeper sleep and more emotional headroom. This marks a turning point. Your environment has been training your emotional brain the entire time. Which version are you rehearsing right now? And what happens if you suddenly take the noise away? Imagine pressing play on that city soundtrack not for 14 days, but for 14 months. The version of your brain you just met after 2 weeks is only the trailer. The full movie plays out slowly, quietly, and it doesn't just touch how you feel, it can reshape how your brain is built. First, the timeline. 2 weeks of constant background noise are enough to push functional systems. Your sleep becomes lighter, your attention more fragile, your stress hormones a little more eager to spike. This is the phase when you notice you're more drained by the end of the day. Or you need more caffeine just to feel normal. But deeper, structural changes usually take months or years of exposure, especially in high-noise environments like busy roads, open-plan offices, or apartments near train lines. Think of it this way. Those first 14 days are your brain's trial adaptation. Circuits in your auditory cortex, thalamus, and limbic system are experimenting with new filters. If the noise keeps going, those experiments start to harden into architecture. Studies in people living in loud urban areas suggest changes in the thickness of the auditory cortex, altered white matter tracts that carry sound and attention signals, and even disrupted hippocampal function, which is crucial for memory and emotional regulation. It's like training for a marathon you never meant to run. Your brain gets better at surviving noise, but not necessarily at thriving. Over years, chronic noise exposure has been linked to higher rates of anxiety, depression, tinnitus, and cognitive fatigue. The hippocampus, already nudged by stress hormones during those first 14 days, may show reduced volume or less efficient connectivity in long-term noise, especially when sleep is fragmented night after night. Meanwhile, this isn't just about your brain. Your body treats ongoing noise as a subtle, inescapable threat. Cortisol and adrenaline run a little higher, a little longer. Blood vessels stay slightly more constricted. Over time, that pattern is associated with higher blood pressure, greater cardiovascular risk, changes in metabolic health. In fact, long-term environmental noise has been tied to increased rates of hypertension and heart disease. As if your arteries are keeping score for every night your nervous system couldn't fully power down. This marks a turning point in how you interpret those first 2 weeks. If, after just 14 days, you notice you're more irritable, more exhausted, or uncomfortable when the room finally goes quiet, that's not a personal failing. That's your brain sending an early warning. This environment is not sustainable. Silence feels strange because your threat systems have been trained to expect constant input. The hopeful part is that the same plasticity that lets your brain adapt negatively can also work in your favor, just as it can remodel around noise. It can recalibrate around quiet, deliberate sound, real recovery. Imagine giving your auditory system periods of true rest, like metabolic fasting for your senses. In the next sections, you'll see how a kind of noise detox can help your brain unlearn hypervigilance, deepen sleep again, and rebuild a healthier baseline for focus, mood, and long-term brain aging. This is the phase when you finally do the opposite of what your environment has trained you to do. You let the volume drop. Imagine treating quiet the way most people treat coffee, as a daily, non-negotiable dose of medicine. Silence is not deprivation. It is a rare therapeutic state where your brain's sensory filters, stress hormones, and exhausted attention networks can reset. Think of it this way. After 2 weeks of constant background sound, even moderate quiet is like stepping out of fluorescent light into dusk. Your nervous system can finally stop squinting. Within the first days of a noise detox, the changes can feel surprisingly physical. You use earplugs on the commute, turn off the TV for company, or enforce an hour of quiet in the evening. Many people report falling asleep faster, waking up less, feeling less wired at bedtime. Under the surface, your cortisol rhythm begins to normalize, with higher levels in the morning and calmer levels at night instead of that flat, tired but wired curve. Heart rate variability, a measure of how flexible your heart is under stress, often improves as sympathetic overdrive eases. Meanwhile, your brain starts reallocating energy. When the constant hum fades, the thalamus is no longer forced to keep every channel half open. The auditory cortex can stop tracking every air conditioner, keyboard click, and muffled conversation. It's like moving your desk from a busy train station to a quiet side street. The important signals finally stand out again. Attention and working memory, which had been leaking energy into constant monitoring, can refocus on a single task without as much background drag. This marks a turning point in neural selectivity. With less incoming noise, the circuits that decide what matters can become more precise again. The reticular activating system, which helps regulate alertness, doesn't have to treat every minor sound as a potential threat. Over time, your brain relearns how to distinguish meaningful cues, a voice, a notification you actually care about, from harmless ambience. In fact, this recalibration is one reason some people suddenly notice birds, distant traffic, or their own breathing again. The signal-to-noise ratio has quietly shifted in your favor, but there is a catch. The first hours of intentional silence can feel uncomfortable, boring, even a little alarming. If you kill the background audio and instantly feel restless or uneasy, that is data. It shows how adapted your brain has become to continuous stimulation. The absence of sound exposes internal noise, racing thoughts, unprocessed stress. Emotions that had been buffered by constant input stay with it, and those reactions usually soften as your nervous system realizes that nothing bad is happening. Pattern interrupt. Imagine an experiment starting tomorrow. One waking hour, no music, no TV, no podcasts, no notifications, just the ordinary sounds of your home, your breathing, maybe distant traffic. Watch what your brain does. Does it hunt for replacement sound, feel relief, or start generating its own mental chatter at double speed? That response reveals your current level of noise dependence. In the next section, you'll see how to extend that single quiet hour into a sustainable noise reduction routine that protects focus, sleep, and long-term brain health. That single quiet hour is your test run. Now you're going to design a world where your brain doesn't have to fight noise all day just to feel normal. Imagine starting with the room you're in right now. Hard walls and bare floors bounce sound around like light in a mirror maze. Add curtains, rugs, cushions, even a bookshelf, and the echo drops. Closing windows that face traffic, choosing the bedroom farthest from the street, or timing errands and commuting for quieter hours, all shave decibels off your day. Each small change lowers the constant demand on your auditory system, so your brain's filters don't have to stay on maximum gain. Think of it this way: you're not just decorating. You're rewiring the soundscape your nervous system lives in. A designated quiet corner at home, a chair, a lamp, no TV, no speakers, becomes the place your brain associates with downshifting. Over time, just sitting there can cue your heart rate and stress hormones to fall, the same way a dark bedroom cues melatonin. Next come the protective tools. Earplugs and noise-canceling headphones are not only for concerts and airplanes. In an open-plan office, on a bus, or in a thin-walled apartment, they turn a 55-decibel hum into a softer backdrop your brain can ignore. It's like giving your thalamus and reticular activating system a break from scanning every keyboard click and muffled conversation as a possible threat. Sound-absorbing panels on one wall, a heavy door sweep, or even a fabric room divider can turn a harsh, reflective space into something your brain can finally relax in. This is the phase when you add structure. Daily or weekly noise fasts act like intermittent fasting for your auditory system for 20 minutes or an hour. You intentionally turn off music, podcasts, notifications, background TV, no replacement sound, no just a little white noise. Your brain gets true sensory rest, allowing the circuits that have been hypervigilant for 14 days of background noise to recalibrate, the same way fasting lets metabolism reset between glucose and fat. Meanwhile, you also learn to balance silence with intentional sound. Passive, constant noise keeps your stress hormones slightly elevated because your brain never knows when to stand down. Deliberate, time-limited listening does the opposite. A playlist for a 30-minute walk. A podcast only during chores. White noise only as a sleep cue. These have clear on-off boundaries. Your brain can predict when sound starts and ends. So the auditory cortex and limbic system don't stay braced all day. Over weeks, these habits add up. Sleep deepens because nighttime noise fragments fewer cycles. Focus sharpens because your attention circuits are no longer exhausted by filtering irrelevant sound. Mood stabilizes as cortisol and adrenaline stop pulsing in response to every door slam and passing truck. Protecting your brain from constant noise becomes a long-term mental health investment, not a luxury, but what happens when your environment doesn't cooperate? When the city, your job, or your neighbors ignore your quiet plan? In the next section, you'll see how your brain can adapt from the inside out, even when the outside world stays loud. Imagine treating the next 14 days as a quiet experiment, literally. You've just seen what happens when background noise never really stops. Now you get to see what happens when you gently turn the volume back down. Think of it this way. Over the first 24 hours of constant noise, Your brain behaved like a security system that couldn't clock out. Your thalamus kept passing along sound. Your reticular activating system stayed a little too alert, and your sleep fractured into lighter, more fragile layers. You might have called it rest, but your neurons knew better. By the end of that first week, this is the phase when fatigue stopped being random. Your attention felt thinner, your patience shorter, your stress a bit closer to the surface. Meanwhile, your hormones were quietly shifting, cortisol staying higher for longer, heart rate variability dipping as your body leaned into a low-grade fight-or-flight mode. It's like your inner orchestra was playing the same tense soundtrack on repeat. Around day 14, something deeper changed. This marks a turning point. Your baseline recalibrated. Silence started to feel strange, even uncomfortable, because your auditory cortex and limbic system had adjusted to a world that never shut up. The security system began treating quiet as suspicious. Mood, focus, even small decisions were now being filtered through a brain that thought constant noise was normal. In fact, research on urban noise shows that this state isn't neutral background at all. It reshapes sensory filters, nudges stress systems upward, fragments deep sleep and REM, and wears down attention and emotional regulation. Over months and years, that can feed into anxiety, low mood, and even tinnitus. But your brain is not stuck. Those same circuits are plastic. Given different input, they can retune. So the next 14 days become your reverse experiment. Instead of adding sound, you subtract it. You reduce unnecessary noise, muted notifications, fewer overlapping devices, maybe noise blocking on your commute. You add short daily quiet windows, even 5 to 10 minutes where your brain doesn't have to monitor anything. You treat changes in your sleep, focus, and mood as data from your own nervous system. Not as random fluctuations, it's like finally letting the orchestra put down its instruments between performances. At first, the silence feels loud. Then, slowly, the players recover. Your body recalibrates stress hormones. Your brain rebuilds deeper sleep. And your attention stops scanning for every passing truck. If you want to keep exploring how everyday habits, sound, light, screens, reshape your brain and body, this is your moment. Subscribe, like, or share to join a community that's learning to live in a way your brain was actually designed to handle. Your soundtrack is playing either way. Now you know you can rewrite it, one quiet decision at a time.